Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today our group 1 will be presenting to you guys about the business cycle of Classic Restorations, a company that specializes in the sales of various restoration parts for the old muscle cars and sport cars. For this presentation, it focuses on expenditure cycle, which consists of business activities involving in purchasing and managing company resources. Specifically, this company expenditure cycles covers two main parts, which is payroll processing and also fixed asset acquisition. So for the payroll processing, it manages employee timesheets, payroll records, and accounting entries. Meanwhile, for the fixed asset system, it handles the purchasing, receiving, and payment processes for long-term assets needed by the business. Although these procedures support daily operations, the companies have reliance on manual documentation and also old method may lead to inefficiencies and internal controversies. Without further ado, let's go dive deeper into the topic and also the expenditure cycle of the company.
Next, for my part, I will explain to you guys about the key stakeholders and also their responsibilities. And bear in mind, we have about 10 key stakeholders in our business cycle, Classic Restorations. And to make it simple, I will explain to you guys in the sequence format, which is we will going to explain the business cycle from the beginning till the end. So we will go to the first one, which is the employee. So what does they do? So the employees record their working hours on manual timesheets and then submit them to department supervisors. And then the next we have the department supervisors that will review and approve the timesheets to ensure the reported working hours are accurate before forwarding them to the payroll clerk. And we have the payroll clerk. Their responsibility is for processing payroll information, preparing payroll summaries, and also ensuring employees receive the correct salary payments. Next, we have the accounts payable clerk, who plays an important role in both payroll and fixed asset activities. And for payroll, the clerk reviews and approves payroll summaries before payments are processed. For fixed assets, the clerk verifies supporting documents such as purchase order, invoices, and also receiving reports before making payments to suppliers. And next, we have the general ledger clerk, who records payroll and fixed asset transactions into the company's accounting system, ensuring that all transactions are properly reflected in the general ledger. So moving on to the fixed asset process, we have department managers who identifies the need for the new fixed assets and approve asset requests for their departments. Once approved, the purchasing department clerk prepares and issues purchase orders to suppliers. And after the assets are delivered, the goods received and compares them with the packing slips and invoices to ensure accuracy. And next we have the suppliers, which provide the requested fixed assets and send invoices to the company for the payment. And lastly, we have bank, who maintains payroll impress account and processes payroll funding deposited by accounts payable department. So in summary, these stakeholders work together to ensure that the payroll activities and fixed asset acquisitions are completed efficiently and accurately within the expenditure cycle. So next, I will pass to my colleague for the further explanation about our business cycle.
Next, I presenting the internal documentation review for the Classic Restoration. As our company grow to the 95 full-time employees, our legacy system of the manual paperwork and stand-alone BC is creating the operational risk. Therefore, this presentation will cover on what function for each internal document and how we redesign them with the strong internal control to protect the company cash and record. Let's start with the payroll cycle, which use 4 main documents. First, we have the employee timesheet. This is the official source document where the employees manually record their total hours, which precisely show their total hours worked for a week. It will review by the supervisor to authorize the total weekly labor hour to prevent any error or fraudulent in overtime hours. Next is the payroll check, which refer to the financial document used to pay the individual's employee salary. In order to prevent unauthorized check from being printed, these checks must be signed by the chief financial officer and never be signed by the payroll clerk. Third, the payroll clerk will generate the payroll summary. This report shows the complete financial breakdown of what the company owns to its employees for a specific month. It acts as a cross-checking tool for telling the account payable how much money to move and telling the general ledger clerk what number to log. And finally, we have a funding check. This check used to move a single lump sum of money from our main business account into a separate, specialized payroll account entitled as a payroll impress account. It locked in the asset amount needed for the total monthly salaries for all employees, which prevent the fraud and protect our primary company cash from being exposed. Moving on to the fixed asset cycle, where we handle a high cost equipment using a 5 document to replace a risky verbal request. It begins with the fixed asset request form. This is a written form used by department manager to ask a permission to buy the asset. It creates a clear paper trail of the asset description, estimate cost and expected useful life, and let the accounting department check the request against the annual budget before any money is spent. It requires authorized signature from the executive and supervisor for approving the request. Once approved, the purchasing clerk will create a purchase order. This is a legally binding contract sent to the supplier that locks the exact item, quantities and price. The purchasing clerk will print one copy to keep in the purchasing file to track the open order, while another copy must be routed to accounting payable department. This document will act as evidence to prevent the vendor from overcharging the company later. When the asset arrives at our warehouse, employee must fill the receiving report. This document records the exact count and condition of the delivery. One copy will be sent to the account payable department so that they can perform a 3-way match against the purchase order and vendor invoice before any money is paid. This will ensure we only pay the asset that safely arrive. Next is the fixed asset charge report. This is an internal notice sent to the accounting department only after the warehouse confirms that the asset is received and tagged with a unique barcode. It provides the exact cost and serial number needed to update our tracking files so that can ensure the company only record the asset that physically owned. Last but not least, the account payable clerk will prepare the journal voucher. This is a formal accounting memo used by the general ledger clerk as an official permission slip to type the asset finance cost into our permanent financial balance sheet. This will ensure the company general ledger and balance sheet keep up to date upon the change in company assets value.
Thank you, Brother LUTFAN, for the explanation. Next, I will continue explain about the flowchart of the current activity. The first one is the flowchart of payroll procedure. The process begins when employee records their working hours on a manual timesheet. The timesheet is then submitted to the department supervisor for review. The supervisor checks the timesheet and approves it. Once approved, the timesheet is forwarded to the payroll clerk. The payroll clerk prepares the payroll charts and updates the employee payroll records in the system. Next, payroll summaries are printed and sent to the financial department for verification. The financial department reviews the payroll information and writes a check for a total payroll amount. The approved check is then sent to the bank and deposited into the payroll impress account. After the funds are available, the individual payroll checks are prepared for the employee. Finally, the payroll checks are signed, approved, and mailed to the employees. Copies of important documents are filed for future reference and audit purpose. Next, we will continue with the flowchart of fixed asset procedure. The process starts when the department user identifies the needs for the fixed asset and verbally report the requirement to the department of manager. The manager reviews it and, if approved, they will prepare the fixed asset request form. So this form will be sent to the purchasing department. The purchasing department receives the request and prepares 2 copies of purchase order. 1 copy will be kept in the department's file, while the other copies will be sent to the supplier. The supplier then delivers the fixed asset together with the packing slip and invoice. Upon receiving the asset, the receiving department checks the goods against the packing slip and invoice to ensure the accuracy. After verification, a receiving report is prepared and sent to the account payable clerk. The account payable clerk reconcile the purchase order, invoice and receipt report before preparing payment to the supplier. A journal. A general voucher is then prepared and posted to the general ledger. At the same time, a fixed asset change report is sent to the fixed asset department to update the fixed asset record. Finally, the asset is forwarded to the user department for use. So that's all from my part. Next.
Thank you, Brother Is, for the explanation. And next, I will continue with the control mechanism in the payroll and fixed asset system of the classic restoration and its weaknesses. First, transaction authorization. Supervisors approve employee timesheet and managers approve fixed asset requests before processing. This control helps ensure that transactions are properly authorized. However, the use of manual timesheet may lead to recording errors, while verbal fixed asset requests may result in poor documentation and unauthorized purchases. And next, second, the segregation of duties. Responsibilities are divided among the payroll, accounts payable, purchasing, receiving and general ledger department. However, the payroll clerk performs several tasks including preparing payroll checks, updating employee record and distributing checks. This concentration of duties increase the risk of fraud and errors. And next, moving on to the supervision control. Supervisors review employee timesheet and managers review fixed asset requests. Although some oversight exists, there is limited supervision over the payroll processing and fixed asset receiving activities, which may allow mistake or irregularities to go undetected. And next, fourth, educate records and documentation. The company maintains important documents such as timesheet, payroll summaries, purchase orders, receiving reports and general vouchers. However, the company relies heavily on the manual document and standalone computer system. In addition, only 2 copies of the purchase order are prepared. As a result, document tracking becomes less effective. And next, fifth, access control. The payroll impress accounts help separate payroll funds from the operating cash, which is provide some protection over the company funds. However, the payroll clerk has a broad access to a payroll record and payroll checks. The classic restoration also does not mention any password protection or asset security control, which is indicate that we safeguard over the company resources. And lastly, 6. Independent verification and reconciliation. The receiving clerk reconcile received good with the packing slip and invoice, while the accounts payable clerk reconcile receiving document before making payment. Despite this control, there is no independent payroll reconciliation and no periodic physical verification of the fixed assets, which is, it will lead to the increased risk of the error and fraud remaining undetected.
Next, for my part, I will discuss the recommendations to improve the internal controls in the payroll cycle and fixed asset cycle at classic restorations. First, in the payroll cycle, one of the main weaknesses is lack of segregation of duties. Currently, the payroll clerk is responsible for several tasks, including preparing payroll checks, updating employee records, distributing payments, and preparing payroll summaries. This gives one employee too much control over the payroll process and increases the risk of fraud and errors. In addition, the company also still relies on manual timesheets, which may result in inaccurate records and inefficient payroll processing. In order to address these issues, the company should separate payroll responsibility among different employees. For example, human resources should maintain employee records, supervisor should approve working hours, and lastly, management should review and approve payroll before payments are made. The company should also implement a computerized payroll system with electronic timekeeping in order to improve accuracy and efficiency. Next, in the fixed asset cycle, a major weakness is the asset requests are made through verbal communications. This may lead to misunderstandings, poor documentation, and unauthorized purchases. Another weakness is the lack of a strong verification process before payments are made to supplier. To improve this process, the company should require all asset requests to be submitted using a standardized request form and approved by the management before any purchase is made. In addition, the company should implement a 3-way matching procedure by comparing the purchase order, receiving report, and supplier invoice before approving payment. This will help ensure that all purchases are properly authorized and accurately recorded. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ammar, for explaining about that recommendation part. Moving on, let's go to the last part, risk. Let's look at the operational financial risk. Under the current payroll setup, we have a major segregation of duties flaw because a single payroll clerk handles check preparation, updates digital records, and directly mails the checks. The company is highly vulnerable to internal fraud such as ghost employee scheme. What is the meaning of ghost employee scheme is that the employee just doesn't exist suddenly have an amount in their account. So furthermore, the accounts payable clerk writes supplier checks without cross-checking the original purchase order. This can cause classic restoration risk, actively overpaying vendors or paying for incorrect quantities. Finally, relying on manual paper trails for asset change reports and using disconnected standalone PCs. What's the meaning of standalone PCs? Is that they only use one PC for every transaction they make. So, this means folders can easily go missing. If that hardware fails or a paper is lost, the company faces permanent data loss and flawed financial reporting. To eliminate these gaps, we propose a transition to modern IT controls. So, instead of isolated PCs, management must implement a centralized ERP system so all departments share real-time data securely. So, we also recommend replacing vulnerable paper timesheet with a biometric time tracking system. This automatically syncs clocking data with the payroll module, completely eliminating time theft and signature forgery. To safeguard our purchasing, we advise configuring the system to enforce an automated three-way match. The software will automatically lock and block any supplier payment unless the purchase order, receiving report and vendor invoice align perfectly. So, last but not least, by enforcing role-based access controls within the software and replacing physical checks with secure electronic funds transfer, also known as EFT, we can establish an unalterable digital audit trail that protects the company's financial asset. That's all from us. And thank you, madam.